And welcome back to the Movie Pope podcast. And we are returning from a hiatus. We've been gone for what was it, Lee? 2 or 3 weeks ish.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah. Honestly, with all the different recording stuff, it's honestly all kind of gets jarring as far as how many times we've been on. I mean, we talk and we meet probably more frequently than we do on there. So there's a lot of things that we talk about that sometimes we make it into any type of video.
No, but still, it just feels so weird because, for those 2 or 3 weeks, we haven't recorded anything. It kind of felt like, we weren't really doing anything because it's like it's like we have the one day where we do numerous sessions, and then we go on hiatus for almost a month, and then when we get back it's like, wow, this feels a bit weird, um but now but now we're currently we started season 2 of the Movie Pope podcast, so this should run probably what the Memorial Day holiday or
Yeah.
what.
Yeah, probably right around there.
Yeah, and then we earn ourselves a nice little break, and then we jump back on, and then we continue all the way until December. I think kind of just go over the whole cycle again. Um, but but I have been looking over the numbers for the channel, and we have gotten some pretty good numbers, but we still want to increase our viewership and and our subs. So if you're new to the channel, please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and share this video and other episodes with everybody that you know. We definitely want to increase everything, at least by the end of season 2, middle of this year. Um, and we definitely want to let y'all know that we're working as hard as we can. Lee, do you hear an echo on your end? Because I can hear a huge echo.
I don't hear an echo on my side.
Yeah, I hear an echo on my end.
Okay, I could decrease the volume on my side really quick. Okay. I guess you talk or could be echo.
Yeah, I don't hear an echo on my end. But yeah, as I was saying, and today is our season 2 premiere, and we are going to be taking a look at the Golden Globe, well, one of the winners of the Golden Globes, the Holdovers, starring Paul Giamatti. Now, we did see the trailer for this movie back in July when we went to go see Oppenheimer, and initially when I saw it, I was like, I mean, it's just another quirky comedy. There's really nothing much to it. But but when you suggested we review this movie, and I actually sat down and watched it, I was like, oh, this is actually not too bad. It's kind of got it kind of reminds me of those those movies from the 1980s that were set in boarding schools, like Dead Poet Society, for instance.
Yes.
Um, so Lee, why don't you go ahead and start us off and give us a brief summary of what the Holdovers is about for those of you who haven't,
Sure.
for whatever reason, seen the movie.
Yeah, which I mean, I'm sure there's a lot of people, right? I don't think it quite had the fanfare that other big titles had. And I'm glad you called it the Holdovers because I actually called it the Leftovers, and I think initially there's some confusion over what I was suggesting. So I'm glad we got on the same page with that. Totally my fault. So yeah, the Holdovers. Honestly, it's a kind of like a story. It takes place in the early '70s at a Barton Academy, which is a boarding school somewhere in the New England area. I don't think they ever actually specified specifically where. We just kind of have a general idea. And really, the story is centered around, I would say, 3 characters, um, and just really kind of the experience they have over Christmas break. Because I guess for this particular boarding school, anybody that's kind of held over for Christmas break, there's a professor or a teacher that stays behind, and then you have any kids that are left over, along with someone that could help prepare food and stuff like that. So that's kind of the collective group that we have, and it kind of creates this nice, kind of cozy makeshift family story, which I thoroughly enjoyed, and I think they did a great job of kind of bringing together a bunch of characters with a lot of emotional baggage, and having them all come together to kind of create this nice, enjoyable, like you said, comedy movie, which I thought there was definitely parts that were pretty humorous on my side. But also I think at the heart of it was just a kind of wholesome look of people kind of sharing in their grief and looking to better themselves. And I think they did a fantastic job with that.
I mean, it's really interesting too because because if you had to pick a theme for the movie, it just seems to be overcoming grief, like you said. Now, what kind of grief kind of varies from person to person because because Hunnam is sort of having to deal with the grief of not having accomplished what he wanted to accomplish in life, i.e., regret. Tully, it's more of him not getting to go to St. Kitts, and Mary obviously having lost her son Curtis in the Vietnam War. Um,
Yes.
but they each find a way to kind of process their grief, so to speak, and they kind of and really they kind of do it with each other's help.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. It's a group effort by all definitions. They all work off each other, and they're honestly they're all people that, especially for the professor, played by Paul Giamatti, Paul Hunnam. He's definitely the least likely person to, at least at the beginning, you feel like would be of assistance to this, just because of his very brash attitude. But it's just interesting as you start to get more into these characters, you start to understand more of what kind of shaped them into the person they are right now, and what they're looking at to ultimately resolve their issues.
You know what? When I was when I was watching this movie, it sort of reminded me of Goodwill Hunting. You remember that movie we watched a few months ago at our
Oh yeah,
friend's house?
absolutely. Yeah, great one with Robin Williams, the late Robin Williams.
The late great Robin Williams, yes,
Yes, thank you. Yes.
and really the relationship between Hunnam and Tully is sort of a callback to what happened with Robin Williams and Matt Damon's character, because they're both very defensive about their position. They kind of figure we are who we are. We're pretty much set in our ways. But as the movie progresses, as the story progresses, they begin to learn more about each other, and they kind of they kind of tell some harsh truths about each other, but they're also kind of helping each other along the way.
Yeah.
The big scene for me kind of stood out was when Hunnam was in that liquor shop and he's like walking around trying to find that bottle of Jim Beam, and Tully's just like pressing it. I'm like, this is really familiar territory right here. But but it's a good thing too because because it kind of follows that New England academia kind of vibe, but it kind of sets its own tone at the same time. Um,
Yeah, I agree. I think it comes from a very, I would say, the support and help that you could get could sometimes come in very unconventional places, and I think it's a kind of a good thing to see maybe a less straightforward approach to people kind of finding what they need in other people. So yeah, it is very interesting, and like I said, I think a very apt comparison there to talk about Goodwill Hunting, which obviously Matt Damon's character was very brash, was constantly lying about stuff, and you start to understand more about his past and his really bad relationship with his father, and kind of, I would say, for Robin Williams' character, a little bit probably not a conventional type of support system, right? Like, I don't think he comes across as kind of that nice, chipper person. Like, he definitely doesn't have a problem with digging down and kind of having a more brash approach to things. So it is very interesting to see kind of the different ways that those things pan out.
so so before we got started, you did mention that this is more of a character study than we do in most other reviews, because really this is a classic example of a character driven plot as opposed to an action driven plot. Um, and I did an interview with Rodney Stringfellow a few months ago. Y'all can check it out in the description below. But we did chat a little bit about the difference between character driven and action driven plots, and which one is better, or if that's just a false dichotomy. But the Holdovers is a classic example of a character study, because we're not really so much invested in what's going on as to how these characters are responding. Um, So so who do you want to start off with? Do you want to start with Tully or Hunnam or Mary?
I would say let's start with that's a good question. I guess we'll start with Hunnam, right? Because I think he is ultimately the linchpin for a lot of what happens and probably has the most to talk about. So I think Hunnam, Professor Hunnam, right, played by Paul Giamatti, who did fantastic.
Hmm.
And I guess a small thing I'd like to talk about before we even get into that was, so in the movie, right, the character has a lazy eye in it. And
Right.
there's
Yeah,
been
Walleye. Yeah, they call him Walleye in there.
yes, yeah, and there was a lot of kind of like interesting things. Like it just came up quite a bit. Obviously, Paul Giamatti doesn't have a lazy eye, and really the cast like all have come together. Like no one's really outright said what it's been. I think we can make a lot of speculation about it, but I just thought something funny to point out was the fact that the lazy eye that he has throughout the whole movie does seem to change from eye to eye from time to time. So if anyone's watching it and thinks like, "Huh, something seems weird there," it's that. I assure you, it does change from eye to eye depending on the situation. So don't think you're going crazy. It legitimately is something going on that they put in for the character.
Now you also
I guess to
mentioned
add to that comedy element.
Now you also mentioned too, yesterday when we were going to a Korean barbecue restaurant with our friends, you did meant you kind of wondered how they achieved it because I read somewhere that they used CGI, but you speculate that he was using some sort of contact lens, right?
Correct. Yes, and I will say that, um, as I said, probably not anything that's like making people lose sleep at night, but it was just kind of interesting to see that. I did read that they didn't use CGI at all, and the actor that played Tully said that Paul Giamatti on set did have the kind of lazy eye thing going on. So I do believe contact lenses is the most likely reason for it. But it was just kind of something funny to see because you kind of wonder about that stuff because it's like you've seen Paul Giamatti in a lot of things. He doesn't have that type of he doesn't have the lazy eye going on. So to have him have it in the movie kind of like took me by surprise. And about halfway through, I had to stop and be like, does Paul Giamatti have a lazy eye? I never noticed it. Like, what's going on? And I had to stop and figure out what was happening. So, yes, a small little blurb about the movie before we get into really the nitty gritty of all the characters.
Yeah, because
Um,
I mean, yeah, because I honestly I didn't notice the lazy eye probably until 20 minutes in when someone pointed it out, and then that's when I started paying attention to it. Um,
yes,
let's go and dive into Paul Hunnam, the classics teacher over at Barton. Now we find out that he's been teaching at Barton for a while, long enough to remember when the headmaster was a schoolboy and he taught him. Um, and you did mention that he's sort of the linchpin in this movie. Can you sort of give us an idea of what your thoughts are and what your take was on the character and Paul Giamatti's
yeah,
portrayal?
yeah, absolutely. And I would say Paul Giamatti absolutely deserves all the accolades he gets for this because I think he did a fantastic job of depicting this character. And Paul Hunnam, the professor, I mean, to really his own words, he's not a very well liked guy, right? He definitely has um, is not well liked by both the kids attending the boarding school, the staff. Like he's just outwardly disliked by many people. And he knows that. And it's interesting because when you start to understand more about his character, you really start to have maybe not empathy, but you start to understand more about kind of the person he is and why he is as crass as he is. So I think for Hunnam, he kind of has two different things going on. One, he has a lot of this kind of personal baggage around his life that I think makes him a very solitary person in the movie. So you kind of find out from in the past, like he was close to getting married, but he has this like really bad perception about the way he looks, and there's a few things that kind of help with that. You have the discussion about his lazy eye, which we kind of good segue for, right? He's got the lazy eye. He mentions that he also has like an illness that causes him to kind of have this really bad odor about himself. So you kind of get this feeling that this character understands that by, the way he's looking at himself, he has this very bad depiction of what he is that I think kind of causes him to really become not really a recluse, but somebody that doesn't really let people in. He kind of has that outer type of look that he feels like is going to kind of disgust people. And I think one of the hard things that happens is he seems to kind of hit off with that one member for the staff, right? The one that they end up meeting at the bar, who we find out picks up extra shifts. So you kind of like see this like, oh, this is an opportunity for Hunnam to kind of maybe break out of a shell, or maybe we're going to kind of see something positive with that, just to have the world come down on him, just to see that the staff member that he, kind of has I would say, good connection with. You find out that she ends up having a boyfriend, and you can kind of see the disgust in his face when he sees it. So he feels like a person that's, kind of become who he is because of all these types of, I would say, personal struggles that he goes through with his appearance and the way he feels like he's viewed by other people.
I mean, my thing is, and this is to go back to the Good Will Hunting reference. I kind of feel like because he's aware of these limitations and of what he's, I guess, what he's going through, he kind of, I feel like he kind of puts on this persona, this abrasive personality on purpose to kind of keep people away.
Absolutely.
It's kind of like
Absolutely.
how Will Hunting kind of like puts on this brash persona because he doesn't want to get hurt.
Exactly.
I feel like if Hunnam kind of does that, then it's like, well, there's a reason why people don't like me. It's because I'm an asshole. As opposed to if he were to be like the nicest guy, in the world, but people still didn't want to be around him, that would be a lot more painful for him to kind of deal with.
Exactly. You can't be hurt if you let nobody in.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. And
Yeah.
and it's
So
kind of and it's kind of interesting because because even if you are as misanthropic as as Hunnam is, you're you're having to be in a situation where you're constantly socializing with people, working as a
yeah.
teacher. So
Yes.
so that's what I just find is so ironic is the fact that this is someone who's so determined to kind of create put distance between himself and others, and yet he's teaching the next generation of kids. What did you think about that exchange between him and the headmaster about him failing the Osgood kid,
Yeah. No,
the
that's
senator's kid? Because I thought that was
yeah.
pretty interesting.
Yeah. There's definitely, so along with like kind of his own personal thing, there definitely seems to be something else there as far as his I guess career path, right? That I think is kind of, kind of created a little bit more of that person that's not interested in, kind of being more open with people. So yeah, you kind of find out in the story that early on, his roommate cheated off of him when he was in Harvard. So he cheated off of him, but because this classmate had a lot more pull because his, parents, or he had better connections. It ended up that Hunnam got in trouble for it, and because of that, I think that his career trajectory is very much hurt by this. I think he really wanted to do more, and I think because of everything that's going on with both his, kind of outward appearance that I think he's very self-conscious about. I think the fact that, he was such a smart person that seemingly has been kind of has an underwhelming future, right? He's the really smart person, I guess, just like in Good Will Hunting, I guess, to bring that up, right? He's just like Will Hunting, where he's a super smart person, but instead of maybe focusing on a career path that goes for that, he opts to go for a much lesser approach where there's not as much pressure put on him. So you kind of see how he, kind of is very embarrassed by it. There's a point where he ends up meeting with he ends up seeing like a classmate from the time there, And he pretty much lies to him about what he's doing to make himself seem better and cooler than what he is. And that's by his own admission. And, I think a lot of that goes down to that, up to the point where you mentioned you have this character that, is ultimately he fails this kid. And I think the reason he fails him is because that's really what he's upset with, right? He saw in the past that he was a character that because he didn't have the right connections, he got screwed out of something he felt like he deserved. And he did because he wasn't the one that cheated, it was the other person. So then now in the future, we could see that he doesn't want to give, these people special attention like the senator's son. Just because you're the senator's son doesn't mean anything. You're going to get graded like everybody else. And I think like that past really kind of culminates into the way he is. And I think at the end, we kind of get this a little bit of relief that once he ultimately, gets fired, and we'll talk about more of that when we talk about Tully. But when, ultimately he gets fired from his position, it's almost kind of a sense of relief, right? Like, I don't think a lot of people, when they talk about, yeah, you're going to get fired from a job, a lot of people don't think about that as a sense of relief. But it almost is a freeing thing for Hunnam's character, because he has such an interest in the world and in history and wants to know more about it. But I think that he's constantly told himself he can't do this stuff. Like, he wants to write a book, but feels like he doesn't have enough to tell a story. But now that he has the free time to do it, I think that story would be a really impressive one with everything he's gone through.
Yeah, I mean, another thing too, is the fact that this is someone who kind of, I feel like yeah, he's working a job where there isn't that much pressure, so to speak, but he's sort of imposed like these limitations on himself,
Yes,
because it's not like he couldn't just write a book if he wanted to. I think a lot of the limitations that or a lot of the things that happen to him are kind of self-inflicted by choice, really.
absolutely. He has that fear of, I think, running into similar situations in the past. And it takes him having those conversations with Tully and having those conversations with Mary that allows him to have that freedom. So it's a really impressive how over this 2 week break, how we really, see how much these characters being close to him have been able to turn him into a better version of himself that he's never been able to see him before. It's just unfortunate that, it's happened so far in his life. Whereas for Tully and Mary, they're, maybe in a different situation where they could have a more positive impact in the more immediate future.
Well, another thing too is the fact that in spite of himself, Hunnam kind of becomes the father figure that Tully
Absolutely.
never got, because obviously Stanley the stepdad isn't really there. Well, that's because we really don't see much of him. And also too, you have his biological father, who's pretty much in a mental hospital, and is pretty much incapable of understanding or knowing what the heck is going on. So really the
Yeah.
only person that that Tully can connect with is Hunnam, because not only he happens to be there, but because they're both on a similar projection, and Tully can sort
Yeah.
of I'm sorry, and Hunnam can sort of provide that guidance because he's been there. He's sort of like the ghost of a future self, I guess, if you want to use like a Christmas
Yeah.
reference.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's a really good one. Yeah.
now the funny now for me, Hunnam really didn't strike me as a really funny character. Like, he did have a few a few sharp quips here and there, but I kind of felt like there really wasn't much to him in terms of social grace, because he always kept up this this defensive barrier. Although
Yeah.
there was this one scene where he gives presents to Mary and Tully, and he gives them Marcus Aurelius's Meditations. He gives them a copy of the same book, and then you find out at the end he's got like a box of them
Yeah.
in his
That was a
office.
good sight gag. Yeah. Yeah, I think a lot of his humor just comes from his actions, and it kind of comes from a place where I feel like he just socially has those obstacles with communicating with people, which goes back to the things he goes through. Like, there's a lot of times where he talks in a way that I don't want to say normal person, but the lay person wouldn't talk about, right? Like, when he's kind of dealing with the situation at the bar, he talks about well, let me help procure or imbibe something, and then he doesn't talk like somebody that you would normally meet when you're out there kind of just meeting people in public.
It's
The
basically
part
it's
where
basic yeah, it's basically obfuscation because the way that he talks, it sort of reminds me of a character from a British sitcom called Yes Minister. And there's a character named Sir Humphrey Appleby who studied classics at Oxford. He pretty much talks in the same roundabout way. So when I saw that, I was just wondering. If do people who study classics do they talk like that because they never really get to the point, and then you need to have someone else kind of translate to the general audience and
yes,
say, oh, he means he lost
that's
his
what he
key,
means.
or yeah, that's what
Yeah.
he means. He lost his key, or oh, you just need someone to open the door, or oh, you actually want to buy someone a drink. Um, that part I kind of found a bit frustrating because I'm like, because again, it goes back to my point where it's kind of like a lot of it seems to be self-inflicted, where he just
Yeah.
chooses to be that way. Because you
Yeah,
kind of get the feeling
absolutely. And I
because he never, because I'm assuming he didn't start off that way. Like he just kind of like created this persona to the point where that's all he knows. He no
yeah.
longer can connect to the ordinary man because he's divorced himself so far from from that part of his life to now he's just this, and that's all
Yeah,
there
it's
is.
second nature for him now. I absolutely agree with that because we know he's smart, right? We know at the age of, I believe he said he was 15 years old when he went to college, right? And he's going to Harvard. So obviously, this is someone that has a very high level of intelligence. We know that he didn't have deep connections and to get into Harvard, so he probably got there a lot based upon just pure merit into Harvard. So I think he's someone that's really smart, and I think that kind of high level intelligence, he just really goes into that type of persona, and that's what kind of creates this person that almost he tries to almost demean people because he everyone kind of feels like a lesser intelligence compared to him.
So speaking of lesser intelligence, I mean, he does interact with these students, who are basically a bunch of rich kids who are there because of them being legacies or family connections.
Yes.
Um, so actually, this is a pretty good transition to Tully because
Yeah.
we really don't know that much about the kid because as opposed to the others whose parents are either in politics or in business or their legacies, we really don't know much about him apart from the fact that he's been to several other schools before Barton, and if he gets in trouble again or if he flunks out, then he goes to um, Union Fork, I think, which is the military
Yeah, a
school.
military school.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, and and also when I was watching the movie again, going back to that classical studies connection, Tully kind of reminds me of Cicero, and Hunnam does quote Cicero in the movie. And you may not know the Suchek, but Cicero was a Roman statesman, and his full name was Marcus Tullius Cicero.
Mm, I'm seeing a connection here.
Yeah, exactly. The whole classics connection. Um, and again, I mean, we're probably gonna beat this reference to death, but but there's just so much goodwill hunting in Tully. Like, it's just, I guess you could say he's sort of like the proto Will Hunting, or he's sort of based on Will Hunting. It's the fact that even though he acts like a jerk, you can clearly see this guy's intelligent. Um, he's not. I mean, from the moment you see him on screen, you can tell this guy knows his stuff. He's not an idiot. It's just he has a very anti-authoritarian vibe about him. He really doesn't respect any authority. So let's go ahead and dive into Angus Tully here.
Yeah. Yeah, because I think for Tully, like a lot of his, and I would say anti-authoritative, like you said, type of persona just comes from really just having such a like just having like a lot of family struggles, right? And you kind of hit some talking points a little bit earlier, but for Tully, and I would really like how if I watched this twice, right? So on my second viewing, I really like the fact that they kind of start to set up some of the stuff with the family picture, right? I think it's a very subtle thing that they add in there But when you understand why that family picture is so important to him, it makes sense by the time we get at the end of the movie, because it's really a family picture of him with his biological father and his mom. So, for kind of his situation, right, you have a mom, and I found the mom to be very disconnected. Like, she didn't really, I have a feeling that just from what we know of the mother, I felt like Tully was probably much, much closer to his biological father, because the mom kind of seems very not interested, right? Like, I think it's kind of really awkward that a mom wouldn't want to have her son with her over the holidays.
Yeah.
I just find that very off putting. And I think, at least the way I perceived it was that he probably didn't have a very super strong relationship with the mom. And, with the father, it's very interesting, right? So he talks about the father, the biological father, and he's ultimately initially he says he's dead, right? So we're kind of going into thinking that he's dead, but then we find out that the father's really mentally ill. And he's currently at some type of sanatorium. No, maybe not that. He's at a place to get help, right? But obviously, his situation's kind of deep, has gotten worse and worse, and really Tully saw all of that, right? And I can't imagine a kid being his age seeing his father, who he probably had the closest connection with out of the family, seeing his father kind of slowly lose grasp on his reality and having to, have the father kind of put away from him is going to mess with somebody, right? It's just a horrible thing. And I think for the mom, she doesn't really make the situation easy, because she's bringing in this, um, new husband, or I don't remember if they got remarried. I don't know, but she's bringing
Yeah,
in
she got remarried. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Thank you. Thank you. So yeah, so she's bringing in, so she has a new husband, and like I said, this is not to say that she has to go through the rest of her life celibate, but it just seems like she puts more care in her new relationship than she does with her son. And I kind of got that from Tully's perspective, and I could certainly empathize with the character, what he's going through, which is why, when we see Tully going through all this stuff and we know all this family baggage, why it's so refreshing that he kind of gets this surrogate family, right? He has, Mary, who ends up kind of becoming the surrogate mother, who, is there to like support him. And I even love at the very end where Mary kind of shows up there, and I don't really know why Mary would show up at the headmaster's place at the very end, but I love how she just kind of puts her hand out for him to hold hands, and I just thought it was such a good moment there. And then you have Hunnam, right, who ends up becoming like kind of the surrogate father figure. So they kind of have a very awkward way, but they kind of create this, little kind of pseudo family thing. There was even a part when they're sitting down for Christmas dinner,
Mhm.
and Tully pretty much says, like, I've never had a dinner like this. Like, I've never had just a sit down thing where we're doing it. So you can see how Tully really enjoys this experience, and it really is kind of shaping him in that little Christmas break, how, he's starting to feel more comfortable with stuff. And that's why I think at the end, when Hunnam kind of, pretty much lies about the situation because he wants to protect Tully. Obviously, Tully has, a great fondness of that, because he's worried about going to the military school. He doesn't want to have to go through this. But Hunnam recognizes that Tully is really great, and he's just going through a lot of his own personal baggage. And because of that, Hunnam, goes ahead, admits that it was his fault for everything, allowing Tully to remain at the school.
Well, you're also forgetting about how, Tully kind of, went to bat for Hunnam earlier when he chases him around the school, and
Oh yeah, absolutely.
he dislocates his shoulder, and he ends up lying about how all this occurred just to save, Hunnam his job. And then he tells him, "Oh yeah, by the way, you owe me now." Um,
Yep. Though I would say as well, and you're absolutely right, right? I would say as well, I think there's just as much an issue with Tully because he's worried about getting kicked out. So if he found out that Tully was if the headmaster found out that Tully was screwing around, I think he'd just be in just as much trouble as Hunnam would be. So I think that one was more quid pro quo compared to maybe some of the other situations. But yeah, I totally agree with you. I think there definitely was some stuff where you start to see how these characters are interacting and really feeling each other out.
But I mean, that instant kind of lays the foundation for for what would become a genuine friendship, because
Oh, absolutely. Yeah,
what starts off as a
absolutely.
quid pro quo kind of they kind of start to learn more about each other, because
100%.
because you remember when they go to Boston and that lady goes up to him and is like and asks him, "Hey, you got a cigarette?" And it leads to that conversation about sex and everything. I just thought,
Yes, talks a lot
I
about
just
candy canes.
yeah, I just thought, what, Tully's kind of like digging in like pretty hard. Like he wants to, he wants to learn a lot about Hunnam, and at one angle, it's like, oh, he's just doing it to mess with him, but at the same time, it's kind of like there's a genuine, sincere desire to want to get to know the guy, because
Yeah,
all
yeah.
he knows of him is he's just this prick who teaches classics and enjoys failing people because he's a bitter old man. You know.
Absolutely, yeah, you're 100% right with that, and yeah, it is. There is a lot of that stuff where they probably bond in maybe unconventional ways, right? In ways that we don't normally think about or see, and it just kind of creates this good relationship. So yeah, absolutely.
Because I mean, because another thing about Tully too. I mean, I think the reason why he's like that is because he's been treated as like a throwaway object. Because I mean,
Yeah,
if you think about it, his mother, his mother doesn't want to have him home for Christmas, and he's pretty upset, and I was genuinely upset watching that too. And then when his mother shows up at the end and just starts acting like, oh, how dare you get involved in our family affairs? I'm like, bitch, shut up. You never gave a shit about your son to begin with. And all and everything that Hunnam said about, this kid's basically, this kid's basically been, being treated really badly because, you couldn't be bothered to come and get him for Christmas. I was like, yeah, that's pretty much it. Like, he's speaking truth to
yeah.
power. That's basically what you did, lady. So don't
Yeah.
so don't sit there and clutch your pearls and say, oh, how dare you do this? I mean, lady, you failed as a parent, because and she even says to herself, she even says, it's time for me to kind of, be happy. I deserve to be happy. I'm like, wow, lady, that really, really does show where your priorities lie as a mother. Like,
Yeah.
I get he's a teenager, but come on. I mean, spend some time with the kid. I mean, how much you want to bet that later on in life he just ends up, resenting you, because it's like, you did this to him. You just sent him off to like all these different boarding schools and threatened to send him to military school, and it kind of just puts a huge chip on his shoulder, later on. Um, Speaking of military school, it's actually a pretty good transition to Mary, because we do because when we're introduced to her, she's she's the would you say she's the head lunch lady or the head cook at
Yes. Yeah.
Barton?
Head cook. Yes.
And
Yes.
and she recently lost her son, who was a student, he was class of '69, of Barton Curtis, who went off to Nam with the hopes of getting the GI Bill when he got out to go to college, and then he gets killed. No, now at first I was a little bit confused, because I thought, she looks a little bit familiar, but then I binge watched Only Murders in the Building a few weeks prior, and I was like, oh wait, she's the detective from seasons 1 and 2. That's who she is.
There you go.
So a lot of things kind of connecting here, but to your point, I mean,
She was also
Mary.
in Sideways with Paul Giamatti back in
That's right.
2004. No one fact checked that. I don't know for a fact, but yes, I believe
Yeah, that's right. That's right. But what I was gonna say was, to your point, I mean, she's very much maternal, from from the very get go, because she's having to deal with the loss of her son. And if you want to read it, in a allegorical sense, she's kind of like, the Virgin Mary who lost her son, in a horrific way. So I think the naming is kind of apropos. But but when you start off when you start off seeing her on screen, and this sounds terrible to say, but you kind of almost want to disregard her, because she's not one of the quote unquote main leads, because she's just there cooking dinner, right? But as you're watching the movie, it's like, okay, there's more to her than meets the eye. So let's go ahead and dive in and take a look at Mary. What were your thoughts about
Yeah,
about her?
she's somebody that, I mean, the way she deals with the grief, right, is she obviously seems to I mean, for the most part, it seemed like she was not processing it right? And I think that's kind of the initial beginning for me was it looked like someone that was kind of just taking it all in. So yeah, like you said, like her son died, right? And her son died at the age of 19, right? So very, very young. And actually, we find out that her son's father, he actually passed away before he even turned 25. So for her, like someone that she, obviously had a very strong relationship with the father, he died before he was 25. Just to have her son die before she's 20, like she's gone through some terrible, terrible losses. And I think something that compounds it, especially for Mary, is that, she realized that her son was really, really smart. Like he had the grades in order to go into whatever he wanted to, but because she is a mother, she didn't have the finances to provide for it. That he ended up going, into the army in order to, get that GI Bill, so he could afford it. So I think that kind of compounds things further for Mary was that, if she was a different person, have better financial situation, her son might not have died, right? And I think that kind of just adds that extra weight to the character. And as we kind of go through, I think that to me the best scene in the whole movie was when the three of them are at that party, and Mary kind of has that emotional breakdown. And I think that that was just such a fantastic job from the acting, just the dialogue, everything was just so superb with that because, she's playing music and she's playing music that her and her son used to listen to, something that, both of them liked. And you kind of see everything bellow up until she kind of has that breaking point where she just kind of loses it. And she's, crying and like really unconsolable in the kitchen because she's thinking about, how her son died. And I just found that to be like it is such an interesting way that everyone deals with grief, where I'm sure she's had a lot of those sad moments, but to see such a public, situation from it, I think was a very cathartic a very cathartic moment for her because it allowed her to probably grieve in a way that she really hasn't properly grieved yet. And I think for her, while her story is very much, truncated because a lot of this deals with more Hunnam and Tully than her, I think she finds that extra sense of purpose with her sister having a baby, and it kind of allows her to have kind of that, look, I lost my son, but I could still be a mother figure to, just in her own way to her sister's child. And she even talks about, like, hey, I'm going to make sure that, I'm going to stay here and continue to work because it's a college fund for that child. So, I think she's just someone that really is a very, very caring person. And to have her go through that sense of loss, I think it's just so traumatic for her. And as I said, I believe, did she win best supporting actress?
Um,
Do you know?
Let me look.
All right. Well, I guess shame on us for not doing our homework beforehand. I guess it's my fault because I brought it up.
Yeah,
But
she did.
I
Yeah.
want to say, okay, yeah. I would say she absolutely deserved it because she totally killed in that scene. And as I said, I think we see her being kind of this very, very. She's a strong motherly figure to a lot of people, and I think that's just her personality. So I think knowing who she is really kind of adds more weight to her losses. But I think, as I said, between Hunnam, Tully, and Mary, I think they all did a fantastic job. And I think kind of the makeshift family they create is something where they're all able to support each other through terrible things. Mary losing a son, Tully really losing grasp on his family, Hunnam kind of having the struggle with his life trajectory and being unhappy with the situation. All these characters, all dysfunctional in their own ways, they all come together and they're able to help build upon each other and kind of create this family dynamic that a lot of them either don't experience or haven't experienced for a long time. So they all kind of create this family that each of them wanted in this very short period of time. And I think it's just such a great movie. And I would strongly suggest, if anyone hasn't checked it out yet, I would definitely give some two big thumbs up for this because I think it's a fantastic thing to watch.
I mean, I mean, what makes it all the more tragic is that the support system only lasts for 2 weeks, and then
I know.
Hunnam gets fired. I will say this: when Hunnam gets fired, I mean, what he says to the headmaster, it made me think of Good Morning Vietnam, because you remember what Cronauer said to that lieutenant before he left. He's like, you're the number one guy who's in most need of a blowjob. I mean, what he tells the headmaster is, you're basically penis cancer in human form, and then he just walks off. And I'm like, I mean, I'm like, you know, it's a bit vulgar, but you know what? It's appropriate. It's such a nice thing to see Hunnam finally get out of his elocution shell and kind of just speak in a direct manner that everybody can understand.
Yeah,
Uh,
absolutely right. Because I mean, that's another situation where the headmaster used to be a student, and he knows him back at the beginning when he was teaching him, and knows the type of person that he is. So it's probably a little bit of him always wanting to say it, but shied away from it because he was worried about the change or worried about the repercussions. Like he was, I think someone that had just kind of relegated himself to existing in the manner it was in. So him being able to do that was kind of, like I said, a refreshing moment where he finally got the freedom to, I think, do more of what he wants to do with his life.
so so as we're wrapping up here, I mean, obviously we can go on for a little bit more, but I want to kind of keep it, at least under 60 minutes. Out of those three characters, who would you say had the most growth?
So I mean, I would say the person the most growth is probably Hunnam, and I think for me the reason I chose Hunnam because I think for both Mary and Tully, I think their situations are a lot more outside of their control, right? Like I think that for them, their situation, they're kind of along for the ride, and it's unfortunate, right? I think for Tully, he's not going to be able to just fix his family situation, especially with the father the way he is. And then for Mary, having the loss of a son, there's just no way that you're going to. I think there's not really ever going to be a great way to deal with that. But for Hunnam, at least from my perspective, his issues were a lot more self-inflicted. So that's why I think for me, his growth ends up being the most important because a lot of his stuff, it's gone on for so long because of stuff that he's pretty much self-imposed upon himself. All the stuff that he goes through is because he's kind of created this for himself, and it's so unfortunate. So to see him get that sense of freedom to go out there and to really write his book and do what he wants to and visit all these locations, I really got that sense of like finally he's able to do more of what he knows he can do. But he's been so down on himself for so long, he doesn't know how to go about and do it. So to me, his growth was the most impressive, even though I think for Tully and Mary, their stories were had a lot more emotional impact that really kind of created a better narrative. So what do you think, Luca, for you?
I mean, I was gonna say Tully, had the most change because he starts off as this as someone who's sort of in his defensive shell, who's like, yeah, you guys are totally screw ups and you don't really know anything, but but you begin to see sparks of humanity in him, such as when he's in bed and that Korean kid is crying and he wets himself and he's like, hey, everybody's upset, but don't let people find out about you wetting the bed, and and we'll just change the sheets in the morning. I was like, okay, that's kind of a big
Yeah.
brotherly thing going on. It's not until they go to Boston and they do all these activities that you start to see Tully becoming more and more open to where he finally reveals, yeah, my dad isn't really dead, he's just in a mental hospital. I feel like I feel like at that moment he's learned to kind of drop his guard and just be open and let others know what's going on. And I think and you've probably heard this before. You don't really make friends until you drop your guard and you put yourself out there. That's what he did. And by the end of the movie, when all the students are back, Kuntz is like, oh yeah, I heard this rumor about him, and I'm glad he's getting fired. And Tully's like, yeah, that's not what I heard. And he walks over to have one last word with him. And I'm like, that's a pretty that for me, that just shows that there's a that that this is a character who who's just completed the first stage of development, and he's kind of working his way up, and and the fact that he's having to deal with the shitty home life, a neglecting mother and a father who is mentally incompetent, it kind of just pulls at your heartstrings, because even if you haven't had that situation, you can sort of empathize with that, because we've sort
Oh
of
yeah.
had to deal with something like that, in our past. Um, so I think for my money, I think Tully is the character who kind of develops the most, and he kind of opens up the most. Um, and I think he has the advantage of youth, because he can sort of learn from the mistakes of Hunnam and his
Absolutely.
father, and know this is where I can go. Um,
Yeah, I definitely think that if you look at the situation, Hunnam would be Tully would become Hunnam if Tully didn't have a Hunnam figure to help him through what he's going through.
well, either that, or he ends up like his dad and ends up in a
Yeah, that's
sanitarium.
that's also a possibility. Yeah.
So I know the Golden Globes has officially spoken on what they thought of the Holdovers, but what would your score be for this movie?
Yeah, honestly, as I said, like you said at the beginning, like we went into this, like I remember seeing kind of uh, seeing the kind of trailers for it and being underwhelmed, right? And I mean, there's not a lot to go off of, so you just have to kind of go with it. But after watching it, it was, like I said, a very, very strong film. Thoroughly liked it. I thought the acting was really good across the board. Especially for Paul Giamatti. I think the actor Tully, this was kind of his first big thing. And obviously for Mary, she did a fantastic job. So just really, really liked all the acting. I think the dialogue was really, really strong. I just really liked it from top to bottom. I would probably say that I would probably give this a 4.2 lazy eyes out of 5. And like I said, I definitely thought that this was, like I said, a really strong movie, and definitely deserving of the accolades that it got.
I'm gonna go 4.5
Ooh.
out of 5 lazy eyes. Um, and I'll say this: I really, really love the throwback to movies from that period. Because from the very beginning, you see the old school Universal Picture logo, and
Yes.
you just see the way that they kind of pay homage to the way that movies were made back in the 60s and 70s. Um, everything from the setting to to the dialogue, the writing, even the locations that they filmed in. My God, it was just so phenomenal. And then and then the acting is just the cherry on top. Um, I will say this. I kind of wish there could have been more fleshed out in some of the ancillary characters, because we only saw them for just
Absolutely.
a little bit. I definitely want to, and this may not be important, but I definitely want to learn more about Kuntz, because I figured he's probably coming from the same place as as Tully, because you remember that exchange he and Tully have, where Tully's basically says, "Well, I know the reason why your parents don't want you back is because you're an asshole, and if I were your parents, I certainly wouldn't want you back," and that really hit home. So I would
Yeah.
really love to have learned more about about Kuntz and some of the other characters as well, but. But obviously, I mean, there's only so much screen time that you can devote to
Yeah.
um, character development. So I really won't fault them on that. Um, Another thing that I will kind of, critique them on is the fact that I feel like Mary was, as great as the acting was, I feel like there could have been more done to kind of flesh the character out,
Yeah.
because because at the end of the day, Mary is mourning for the loss of Curtis, and obviously losing a child in war is nothing trivial. But at the same time, I kind of feel like there could have been more layers to her, you know. But again, I mean, there's only so much screen time you can devote to to every character. So
Yeah.
I really won't fault them too much on that. But I would have loved to have seen them do more with some of the characters, rather than just have them appear very briefly and then they disappear for a third of the movie.
Agreed. Yeah, there are characters that definitely deserve some more screen time. Could not agree with that anymore. Totally, 100% on the same page.
Excellent. Well, that's going to do it for our review of the Holdovers and the season 2 premiere of the Movie Pope podcast. What y'all think of the movie? Do you agree with our assessment, or do you think, maybe you guys should have talked more about Koontz because he is a bit of an interesting dickbag? But remember to like, comment, subscribe, and let us know down in the comments which movies you'd like to see us review next. We're definitely open to engagement from our viewers, and like I said, I mean, we are looking to grow the channel, so please share this with everybody that you know. Please engage in the comments because it lets us know whether or not we're doing a good job. And as always, thank you so much for taking the time to watch, and we'll catch you on the flip side.